see, share them, tweet at me, email. Happy to discuss this. So about me, in a past life or in several past lives, I was kind of a DevOps-ish, Perl-ish guy. I often describe myself as the Perl guy on the Java team. After that, I was what I would call a JavaScript ruiner. That's not imposter syndrome. That's just the reality of how good I was at JavaScript at the time. From there, became kind of an agile facilitator, helping a company during their agile transformation. And then took a job as what I would say is an open source enabler. So I was working in a large open source program office, helping developers by streamlining the process to open up their ability to contribute to projects, be involved in projects, release projects of their own, which takes me to the now, head of open source at Indeed.com. It's the job site, the biggest job site in the world. And in a future life, I see myself as some kind of combination between rockstar, vampire, wizard, and robot. But obviously, I'm still figuring that out. So I want to also tell a bit of a story, and this goes back to the landscape when I joined Indeed in 2017. So I joined the company in very late November, and at that point, budget for running the program office had already been allocated, assigned, and just sort of penciled in. They had a rough idea for what they thought it would look like, and there were some sponsorships that they had already on the radar. The Cloud Native Computing Foundation, the Apache Software Foundation, Python Software Foundation, the Open Source Initiative, and then money for a large conference sponsorship, and then some money to give to Webpack. I was able to find room in the budget to give some money also to Outreachy. Want to encourage everybody to do that. It's a fantastic program that we should all be supporting. But the thing I really want to call attention to on the picture here is Webpack, because if you look at everything else, there are foundations that are supporting entire ecosystems, or the Open Source Initiative, who guards the definition of what it means for a project to be open source in a significant conference, and then this one software package that clearly isn't used everywhere in the stack. It's used in some places. And so I asked about how we landed on this group of sponsorships, and as I understand it, the story went something like this. There was someone senior in the company who said, we should be giving money to Webpack because we use it. And my boss, Jack Humphrey, said, I think this is a fantastic idea. Awesome. And then it just happened, right? And that's not usually how, at least it is supposed to work. How it supposedly works is a program head defines a budget, and then they select some sponsorships that are strategic in nature, things that will help them move messaging forward, or things that they think need to be supported. And then, every quarter or so, you sign and execute those sponsorships. And this might be how you think it's going to work, and you might hope that it's going to get you to world peace. But it doesn't quite. How it actually works is the program head asks for some budget, and then they get back an adjusted budget that's usually been trimmed in some way or another. And then you earmark where you think the sponsorships are going to go. Beginning of the year starts, it's January 1, and if you're me, it's January 2, and you start getting all these new ideas of things that you didn't think about when you were doing the original budget, and you're now reprioritizing. Are these the right sponsorships that I want to do? Where do these new ideas fit into things? And then there are senior folks who come in and they make recommendations about other projects that they think that you should be supporting. We should show up at this conference, or we should be sponsoring this community, or we should be giving money to this project. And then there are some high-level discussions, in this case between me and my boss and some other senior folks, and then we have some reasonable disagreements about how we think we should distribute the money. And in the end, we land to compromise, half happy, right? Some of us get what we want, some of us are sad because they think we're doing the wrong things, and some people get kind of a mixed bag. That's all fine. That's sort of the way you work through these kinds of problems. But these high-level discussions are exclusive in nature, right? So if these are the people who are having the discussion, this is not what our company looks like, right? Below us, there are several people who manage teams. Those teams have team leads. Those team leads have developers and designers and people all throughout the company who are doing a lot of work that aren't involved in these discussions, right? So the discussions are being held by a very small group of people, and those discussions are seldom transparent. Unless you're in the habit of publishing transparency notes on the kind of meetings that you're having, someone who's further down in the organization might understand we give money to the Python Software Foundation, but they might not have any idea on how you got to that decision, right? So the discussions are seldom transparent. And then teams and individuals who have ideas or have opinions about where you should be sending sponsorship dollars have to escalate requests. And that's easy if you're high up in the organization, and if you're further down in the organization, depending on what your organization is like, it might be a game of telephone or hundreds of games of telephone that are competing for information. So when we looked at this, we decided we wanted to try something new, and so we've created something we call the FOSS Contributor Fund. And the FOSS Contributor Fund is an initiative that we're running over the course of the year to attempt to democratize this aspect of the sponsorship progress. And I want to talk about how we put it together, what we think it's going to do, what we've learned about running it so far, and what the intentions are. So the FOSS Contributor Fund is a dedicated budget that we asked for the year that is separate from anything at the organizational level or anything at the conference level. So these are just sponsorship dollars that we've put in a bucket that will be distributed to projects that we use. The projects to receive funds, they have to be nominated by employees. So anyone in the company has the capability to say, this project is important to my work, and we should be making sure that we're helping sponsor and sustain them. The projects do have to meet a set of selection criteria, and I'll go over those here in a moment. And then contributors at any given month vote on the allocation of the funds. So anyone who makes an open source contribution or a contribution to a free software project over the course of January will get to vote on where the funds for January are distributed. And they're distributing on $10,000. So it's $10,000 a month over the course of 2019 that will go to free and open source software projects. So as far as the project selection criteria go, it has to be, the project has to use an OSI approved license. The project has to be something that we use at Indeed. Now that doesn't mean that it's somewhere in our stack. It could be the imaging software that the IT group uses to get new machines ready for new employees, right? So we have to use it somewhere. They have to have some way to receive funds. Not all projects can or want to receive money, and so there has to be some way for our procurement department to pay them. Anybody here work with procurement departments and corporations? Maybe 24 hands. It's pretty easy for me to give somebody $100. A lot harder for me to give someone $1,000. Gets weirdly easier for me to do it if it's $10,000 because there's a process for it, right? So if we're going to make donations of this size to software projects, they have to have some mechanism in place. And that can be a PayPal button as far as we're concerned, but an open collective or something similar. And then the project can't be owned by an employee. You can't self-nominate your project that you're moonlighting on to receive $10,000, right? So what we're hoping to accomplish with the initiative is several things. The key thing, and I really want to talk about this for a second after I get a quick drink, is that we want to drive open source participation within Indeed. So let's talk for a moment about what it means to sustain an open source project. Money doesn't solve the problem. The sustainability conversation has been going on for several years now, and it's widely understood that the way that you sustain software is you get involved in sustaining the software, right? Money is an easier lever to flip within a corporate context than time sometimes. Not all companies are equal. So one of the goals of the initiative is we really want to get people more involved. That's why the contributors over a given month are the ones who have the voice in voting on where the funds are distributed. We want to recognize their work there and then run parallel initiatives to get them more involved, highlight projects that should be receiving contributions from us, and make sure that people understand sort of what the process is and what the inroads are. The next thing is we want to highlight projects that are important to everyone in the company, and I'm looking around the room here for one of the people I know that also runs an open source program office. Who runs an open source program office in the room or is involved in it? Wow, far more of you than I would expect. Keep your hand up if you know 100% of all the open source projects in your company. All right, 1, 2 people, right? If I look at something like a white source report or a code analysis tool that kind of looks at our stack to tell us what there are, we have thousands of projects and modules that are used everywhere. And I expect that's the same for most of the rest of you in anything but a small company. And so if you quiz me in the hallway, I could probably give 5 or 6 things pretty easily, and the longer I ramble, I'll get to 10 or 20. I'm not going to name 1,000 things. But there are people in the company who use these packages and use this software every day, and it's critical to the work that they do. And it's not visible to us that it's important to them. And this is a way for them to highlight projects that are important and to hopefully discover things that maybe aren't getting the kind of support that we should be giving them. Obviously, we want to help support and sustain the software that we are dependent on. But we also are wanting to try something new in the sustainability space. Again, the conversation has been going on for more than a few years, and it really ticked up over the last few years about how to keep these projects sustainable. And so there are a lot of different people trying a lot of different things to approach the problem. This feels like a new one, and we want to run an experiment with it. So all sounds good. What could possibly go wrong? Several things. I touched on this briefly, but money might be wrong for the project. Some projects explicitly don't want to receive money. Some projects have decided that the amount of money that they would need to receive to make a difference for the project is so significant that it's not worth the overhead to try to gain it, and they take a different philosophical approach. So some projects just don't want the money. Some projects, if you show up with a drive-by sizable contribution, it actually can create problems for them. I think it was Deb earlier that was talking about Conservancy helping with projects who get money and aren't sure what to do with it, right? So money might be the wrong answer, and again, money won't solve the problems. Work solves the problems. Our voting process might unintentionally select a project that is problematic in some way. It might have a toxic leader. It might have a toxic culture. There might be some other problem with the project that we have to take a step back and see if this is the right thing for us to be doing as a company. Our process might break down in so many ways, right? We might get to a point that we realize we're not actually meeting any of the goals. We're not driving participation. The money isn't making a difference. We've laid out how we think this is going to work for us, but it might not go the direction that we think it's going to. We might ultimately need to curate nominations. Again, thousands of modules, thousands of projects in use all across the company. If someone goes through and nominates all of them, you can't run a CIVS poll for 2,000 projects, right? You can, even when you're trying to do 10 or 12, you're kind of pushing the boundaries of what people can wrap their heads around. And so we might at some point need to police and curate nominations in a way that's transparent for everyone. So there's all kinds of things that can go wrong. As we've talked about the project internally, we've set the expectation that we're going to learn as we go, and we're going to share our learnings as we go, and we're going to commit to sharing our learnings both inside and outside the company as we run the fund, because we'd like to see other people trying new things in the sponsorship space. And we think this is a neat idea to get people more directly involved. So I want to talk a little bit about how we got executive buy-in for this, because it felt like a very tall ask at the time. And I really would like to be able to say, here is a fantastic strategy that I used to implement to get this sold, but the reality is it went something like this. Too long don't read, could I have $120,000 for a sustainability fund for next year? And Jack said, I think that's a fantastic idea. And that sounded familiar. It's more or less how Webpack went, I think, anyway. This is more a testament to Jack than it is to anything else. The reality is I had written a one-pager so that it would be easier for him to consume. And the first paragraph underneath the TLDR was, I'm asking for a budget of $120,000 allocated in 2019 for distribution to free and open source projects which Indeed consumes. Each month, Indeed would distribute $10,000 to a project voted on by Indeedians who made an open source contribution that month. This would democratize where some of Indeed's open source dollars go, while giving open source participants motivation to self-identify and engage with the program. And then there were a little bit of breakdown of how I thought it would work and what I thought the goals would go look like. And I kind of fired and forgot, right? I've written this thing up, I've got it out of my brain, I'll hand it off. It felt like a long shot. It was very early in the year, actually, when I sent it. So when he responded within, an hour, this is an actual code, I think this is a fantastic idea. It's the first thing that he said. I was definitely caught a little flat-footed. And I can't tell you personally how many times I rewrote that number. Can I have $5,000? Can I have $1,000? Can I have $120,000? Right? Who's boss?
Your boss might watch this. Don't give that away.
Oh, that's fine. No, it's fine. He knows. I don't really hide it. Sorry, I was told not to give that away, and I was shushed by someone from the front. Don't let your boss know. No, absolutely. I rewrote this number several times, but in the end, I decided to ask for $120,000 for it, and he thought it was a fantastic idea. The lesson here is always ask, right? If I had asked for $60,000, he would have said, I think that's a fantastic idea, right? Well, I hope so. And I kind of broke myself of the habit of not always asking through charity fundraising that I had done over the years. You do enough of it, you realize that you ask people, because if you don't ask them, they never have a chance to say yes, right? And I'm going to come back to always ask a few times here. So it's very early days, but I want to talk about what we've learned so far. So it is February something. I don't know. I've been on the road a little bit. It is February something now. So January just ended. What have we learned so far? For January contributions, I can definitively say they went up. I hope Brian's not in the room because he's going to want to have lots of questions about this one in particular. This is just count of contributions, October, November, December, January. November, fairly slow for us. We weren't running any programs and big holiday gap in the U.S. in the middle of it. And there are a lot of factors that could be going into why contributions in January were higher, but I know they were. Whether or not it was all tied to the program, that remains to be seen. Nominated projects, we had about 20 projects that were nominated, and 10 of them are projects that I would probably name if you said, hey, what do you use at Indeed? 5 of them, I knew about them, but I didn't know we were using them. And there were 5 projects I've never heard of, right? 5 software projects that are free and open source, that are in use at Indeed, that probably show up in a report somewhere, that are competing for attention with thousands of other things on the same report, but they were important enough to someone else in the company who was involved in contributing to open source that they nominated them and said, we think they should be receiving $10,000. And that's super fascinating to me, right? This is one of the results that I was really hoping that we would see. So excited about that. As far as participation, what has it done for open source participation? I'm not going to make a call on that yet. It's very early days, very young chick here that we're growing in the program. So participation is TBD, but as we learn more about it over the year, like I said, we will continue to share. Now, if you're interested in trying something like this yourself and democratizing this part of the sponsorship process and putting some of that power into the hands of other people in your company, there's some things that you can do. If you want to get in touch with us, this is basically an email alias to me and 2 other people in the company, so it's not you're not signing up for lists, you're not signing up for leads. This is literally send us an email and say, I want to hear how this goes, or we want you to come help sell a similar idea internally. Reach out, and we'll let you know how it's going. As far as the program itself, after we get a little bit more information about how it's turning out for us, we will have what we need to release documentation about everything in the program under a CC license document, probably end of the quarter or so. So I'm expecting by the end of March, beginning of April, we'll push out better documentation about what we learned, how it's put together, and give the ability for anybody to copy and modify that. If you are working in a company and using free and open source software, speak up. Advocate for the projects that you're using. Always ask, right? Because if you don't ask, you don't know what kind of support that you'll get. If you are someone who is involved in making decisions about how sponsorship dollars are spent in your company, always ask, right? Ask everyone in the company. Go to the IT desk and ask them what is important to them. What do they need to do their job? Ask people in design, ask people in research, ask people in all parts of the organization what is important to them, and you will learn things. You will find things out about the software that's being used. We're past the point where if you work for a large company, your budget is almost certainly set by now, and you probably have some room to play in there, but not room for a significant initiative or a significant new one. But if you do want to get started earlier, the Open Collective launched something, I think for the first time in December, where you can purchase digital gift cards that can be used to provide funds for free and open source software, actually any project that has an Open Collective behind it. And so this is a great way to recognize open source participants in your own company, giving them the ability to say, here is some cashy money that you can give to a project on Open Collective. Super interesting and super cool idea. I'm getting the 10-minute sign there, which is exactly perfect because I wanted to leave about 10 minutes of play at the end for questions. I'm good for questions.
Thank you, Dwayne.
Is it what I'm doing?
1 and then 2, and we'll keep going from there.
You sort of answered my question, I think, a little bit, but the idea of having the employee being contributors, the people who are voting and nominating projects is great.
Right.
One of the questions I had was, how well did that work with other organizations besides developers, and they're contributing to open source projects for those sorts of needs, which are often more need more attention?
Yeah. So if I'm sort of mentally scrolling through, like, what's our what's sort of the cross section of our contributors right now and our active participants. Most of them are developers because the pathways for developers are fairly well worn. The documentation that we push internally and the events that we hold internally, we consistently try to send the message that this is not a developer thing. You can be a designer, you can be a pure QA test engineer, you can come from a wide range of disciplines and come in and make contributions. We're holding an event in Q1 around getting people onboarded for their first contribution. So people who've never made a contribution who want to make a contribution. We keep trying to cast a wide net, and if I was to be honest, I don't know that we've successfully learned how to engage design in these same conversations and other parts of the organization. So we keep trying things and iterating on them and running experiments, and we're hoping to grow participation kind of at all levels. So thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the nomination process?
The question was, can you tell us a little bit more about the nomination process? So I alluded in one of the slides that we wanted people, it was when I was first writing up the document and said that it gave people the opportunity to self-identify and engage with the program. The kind of bumpers that we've put around that, and I guess at first I should clarify, we don't have a workflow in the company that forces you to come through and disclose all of your open source work, right? We have policies, but you don't have to like turn over your GitHub ID when you turn up or turn over your other IDs. We want people to come and self-report this information, and then we want to get them engaged with the program. We take nominations from people who've done that, right? So we promote it through blog posts, through, we have an internal network of monitors that we can post slides to. We promote it through that. So we invite people to nominate projects that they're looking for. And when they go to the nomination process, they say, tell us who you are, right? And after that, then they can nominate something. Someone else in the program then goes back and vets those nominations and makes sure they have an OSI approved license, that we understand where we're using it, and kind of checks to make sure that it meets all the criteria. So that's a little more about the nomination process.
So you
Yes, sir.
shared the story about how your boss was very willing to, approve this program
Right.
that you're building. Can you kind of double click a little bit on that for the rest of us whose boss is not that understanding? Right? Like, what part of the pitch you think could align well with their sense of concern, etc.?
Fantastic question. To summarize it, my boss was super easy to convince, and not everyone else's is. I'm super lucky, right? I have worked in programs that were resource starved, and it's really hard to get anything done. And in any given company, you know, that same bucket of $120,000 is competing with many, many other things. So convincing someone that this is where you should be spending the money can sometimes be an uphill fight. Here's what I'm hoping will happen. I'm hoping that we will run the experiment and we will learn enough that we can share the upside of it, that then we can give people that ammunition to take back to have those conversations, right? Again, early days yet, still working our way through it, but work for an awesome boss is the best advice I can give right now.
Further questions, folks?
You've done a lot of outreach internally to educate your employees about what's going on with your idea here. What about the projects that actually win? Are you going to send them a link to your FOSDEM video so that they know what you're trying to do?
So,
And an extra credit follow-up, will you get feedback from them on what they think about it?
it's actually a fantastic point, and thank you, Tom, for raising that. Like, what about the projects? And so one of the things that could go wrong in the process coming apart is we could show up to a project and say, we've decided to give you $10,000, and they might say, no, we're good, right? And we haven't built in anything to the process that says, how do we like renominate or what do we do there? We want to make sure that we're pointing them to resources so that they've got the help with the funds if they need them, right? So, and that's kind of the first thing that I think about. For projects like Webpack and Babel, right, that are kind of used to this fundraising model, they already know what to do with it. But for a project that doesn't know what to do with it, we want to point them to Conservancy to make sure that they're getting some support there. And we want to stay engaged with them to make sure that they've got what they need, right? If they need help, we'd like to help them like get connected to the right resources. And for the ones that are willing to talk about like, hey, this was great and here's what I did for our project, we'll amplify those stories as well. I'll be talking and blogging about this kind of for the rest of the year. So.
Okay, we can take one more question, and since Jenny is live tweeting, she totally gets to ask it.
Awesome.
Hello.
Hello.
So in all of your talk, you've been talking about projects, and they specifically seem, and correct me if I'm wrong, they seem like projects that are more likely to be things that we're using, so toolings and languages and stuff like that. But as in this room, we've talked a lot about communities not just being about the projects we're actually using, but also the events that are going on.
Right.
How does events, which are a lot of the time grassroots people who no one knows about that need support to actually even just put a venue over their heads, how do they get part of this funding? Or is there a plan to make that act more accessible?
Really good question. The way that I handled this when putting the budget together for this year was we have an allocation marked for conferences and events sponsorship that is separate from this pool. This pool is protected and only goes to project. Now, if a project wants to use the money to host events, great, like it's yours now, right? But if there are events or community needs that are bigger than an individual project that are around more of an ecosystem, we've got sponsorship dollars that we've set aside for that, some of which are earmarked for conferences and some of which are kind of things we expect to encounter over the year. And so there's not a clear, we didn't build in a process for that in this part of it, because I didn't want to see us over-engineer an initial solution, right? As the year goes on, if we get a lot of requests for, hey, will you sponsor this event or this meetup or something that falls in the gray area, then we'll adjust the process as we go. Cool, thank you. Somebody wants to come get the mic.
Guys, if there's a free seat beside you, please move in. Because we'll have somebody else to go. If I see empty spaces, I'm going to be calling on people. In grateful reward for you moving in, we're about to start distributing chocolate by throwing it at y'all, so that's going to be amazing.
Yes, sir. Good to see you. Yeah, thank you.
Come on in, the water's
Now
fine.
I can breathe. Yeah.
Welcome,
I should
everyone.
get this off. It's on the mic. Yeah.